In episode 36 of Ask the Masters, Master Ryan Oakes meets with Daniel Pitts, a master rock sculptor. He tells you some of the tips and tricks that you need to understand about sculpting rocks. This is not only great for someone who does rock, but someone who supervises rock. Make sure that you listen through. You do not want to miss the next lifestyle event with Ask the Masters on February 27th and 28th. We are being hosted by Bazaza Tile, Laticrete, and Wet Edge, and we're going to get dirty. We're actually going to install paper-faced Bazaza Tile with the backdrop of Laticrete, all at the Wet Edge facility. Enjoy.
All right, I'm Ryan Oakes. I'm an SWD master, and today I have with me Dan Pitts from Ocean Rock Industries out of BC. And Dan, BC, is that part of Canada?
Yeah, it's a fairly big part of Canada. A lot of people, when you say BC, they say, oh, wow, you live in BC. Wow, the mountains, the rivers, the ocean. And it's a good spot, good place to live.
I had a guy the other night, I was talking about BC, and I think we were talking about you, and he said you were from Canada. I was like, where? I said, BC. He said, oh, that's not Canada. I guess this happens a bit, but
that's fun.
What part of BC?
So I'm from Squamish, BC, which is just north of Vancouver and south of Whistler, so right in the middle. So we're right on where the ocean kind of meets the mountains and the river. So in the winter we're up in the mountains, and in the summer we're still in the mountains, but on the ocean more.
So you sled?
Yeah.
Snowboard?
Sled, snowboard.
Snow?
Yeah. Yeah, even when I'm,
Do you ever work?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, when I'm sledding, I'm working. I'm up there. I've made rock molds from all the rocks up in the mountains that we go sledding, sled access to. It kind of, it inspires you when you're up there and you're, all alone, and you get these big spears sticking out of the mountains, and you can get right up close and personal with them, and it really inspires you to.
So you're in a killer place for inspiration. I mean,
yeah,
rocks everywhere you live, and your back door, you have rocks in your backyard, right?
Yeah, well,
basically.
Yeah, we do. We, everywhere you go, like I can take my dog for a walk, and there's cliff faces and moss and lichens and colors, all different colors everywhere. River, eroded rock, and you get a good feel of really what is out and what's around.
I think I heard someone say one time, you carve rocks better than God.
Well, that's a good compliment, I guess.
I'm sorry, it sounded funny, but I did hear that. So I didn't say it.
Thank you.
So what's the process? How do you, or as you would say, the process, right?
Yeah.
What's the process?
Well, every project starts with a design. A lot of times, even before I go to a project, someone might say to me, okay, we want to do a wine cave, and before I've even been to the place, I've already got this vision, of what I want to sell to this project. It could be totally different than what the client wants. It could be that, but that's just immediately what goes through your brain in the start of the design phase. So when I show up to a project, I can already visualize, from what I had in my mind to what is on site. I can see the different aspects, some overhangs, maybe, something's getting pinched out and there's a quartz vein kind of in the middle, and, a nice arête around the corner, some Gastons.
Some Gastons? Do you take photos of rocks and keep them while you carve?
I don't typically use photos while I'm carving, just because I find it more of a distraction. It's quick when you're really getting into it. It's fast. It's all about timing.
Mm-hmm.
My techniques are a little bit different than a lot of other guys. I'm not saying that anyone's is right. It's just a matter of personal preference. How everything comes out is, it's directly from your brain to your hands. You know, there's when
Like
you're
a
looking at
musician, play an
photos.
instrument.
Exactly. When I'm looking at a photo of something compared to where we want to go with the design, that's basically all it is we'll get a rough shape of maybe something that the client got a reference from when you sell the project, and basically go from there. As far as all the little crack details and stuff, it just really takes practice.
Yeah, yeah. So, that's interesting. I've seen the process, and a lot of guys do cast molds and then take those molds and then kind of seam them all together and try to puzzle something together. And where that works, you freehand carve everything, right? It's just
Typically, yeah. That's I think when I learned to do this, I learned with castings and making molds. The guy that taught me all this, Frank Fletcher, who owned a company in Asia called Asia Rock Art, and they did Hong Kong Park, some very big, substantial projects, like 60-foot waterfalls and
wow.
big walkthroughs, and the realism you get with castings is, it's not really comparable to what most people can create in the positive.
Mm-hmm.
So the way it ends up coming out is, the bigger the panel, the less, details you see from when the panels are blended. But the smaller the panels, the more you can do with relief by using those panels. So what really got me going on those, and why I kind of took a different direction was, one, when I first started doing this, I only had a carport at my townhouse. That's my work area. That was my work area. So, I had castings. I had 4x8 castings, 4-foot by 8-foot castings, just crammed in this small little carport area, as my samples. And, I'd go around and make molds. I went to Hawaii and made some molds of lava. And I made some castings from that, and what ended up happening and what kind of turned me away from it was, there was a house fire, and the whole townhouse complex burned down. So I lost all my castings, lost all my molds. I had a library of like 15 molds that were pretty big molds that I spent pretty much all my money on at the time, and lost all that. Insurance ended up giving me some money to recreate a couple of them. And I remembered the locations to some of those. But then once I started kind of going again and getting back into it, driving forward, I realized that I could make a lot of the details in the positive with just different tools, and I enjoyed creating those little tools, like a piece of styrofoam, a piece of, old concrete that you find on a job site. All that has different texture, right? You could find a beer can and smash it into the wall and make some texture. It's really all about texture. So that was a big turning point.
I've seen some of your tools. It's interesting because you would think, these to the layman, the quick glance says it's just a bunch of trowels. But to a knowledgeable mason, these trowels aren't just random trowels. They didn't come off the shelf. They're modified. So why do you do that? Why do you grind and you change the shape of the trowels?
Well, when you're cutting and trying to get fine lines, a lot of times, instead of using like a trowel that you just buy off the shelf from a masonry supply store, typically they're a bit thicker. Yeah. Like they've got a hard edge. If you look really close, it's like the back of a knife. It's got that hard edge, and then the front of the knife has the sharp edge. Well, if you think about what's going to draw a finer line in the material, the sharper edge.
Sets of pencils.
Exactly. So that's it. Exactly. We shape, and I've just taken a regular pool trowel and I modify it with a point tip on it. which I find is my biggest and most popular tool that I end up grabbing. And I generally work with the trowel on each hand if I'm carving. That's kind of.
I think it's interesting to see the carving technique. I think I would liken it to painting. So you watch somebody like Bob Ross. We've had some jokes with this guy.
Yeah.
And happy little accident. And
Exactly.
it's great to watch somebody like that paint, and you think, man, they make it look so easy. I can do that. And you grab a paintbrush, and you're like, oh, man, I really don't know what I'm doing. And that's kind of the same way you're working.
It just takes time, practice.
And it takes practice. So what I think is neat about drawing with a pencil is, even if someone doesn't have skills, if they're not genetically coded to draw, they can be taught to draw at a basic level. You can teach them fundamental techniques. You find carving to be the same way? Are there some fundamental techniques?
Yeah, I would say so. Generally, if I'm, bringing one of my guys into the carving aspect of the project, I typically get them to work on the big shapes. Mm-hmm. So I'll say, let's do something here. This is, you can kind of see the rough shape, whether it's out of foam or, steel, armature. They've got a map to kind of follow. So I typically try to find guys that have no concrete experience, because generally what I've found is anyone that has the concrete experience typically tends to try to just smooth everything
right
out. That's just in their brain. They want it to be flat, smooth, perfect. This is the opposite. Like when I'm moving material around, I'm using the edge of the material, because that opens up the pores of the concrete, and you're not creating that skin on it. And that's just one of the differences of the way that I do my technique.
I've heard you say you carve for color. What does that mean?
Yeah, I learned this from a guy down in California, Josh, who put that in my brain. He said, you know what, you just, like, when you're carving, carve for something, carve for, he said he carves for color. And when you're carving and creating different aspects of the rock, whether it's a fallout, if you look, and there's so many examples of it where I am in British Columbia, you can see the color change, whether there was some iron oxide got in behind that crack and had some air that was in that crack, in that void, for 1,000 years, 100,000 million years, and then all of a sudden whatever came in, water, kind of spread it out and opened it up and let it fall out, and now you can see the different colors. So that's one way to look at it when you're carving, carve for color.
Yeah, well, the texture on the rock, as you said, a lot of masons want to slick it over, right? That's closing of the pores, but when you're dragging the material, you're opening the pores and letting the color react differently, right?
Well, typically at that stage in the process, what I end up doing is, whether if you're going to stamp it, put texture in with a piece of what I call sight garbage. Literally, I'm constantly looking around. Oh, there's new textures. I try new things all the time. Slick it up. You can slick over top of that texture you put in just to give it that kind of rubbed finish. When you color, all those textures will come out.
Yeah. We were carving with using skins and stamps, and you said, man, you really don't need this. Just use your intuition.
I typically like to use tooled texture.
Yeah.
Now, depending on the type of work that you're doing in a production style work, where it's something that you're putting on a lot of material, if it's, say, at the side of a highway, like highway project, where there's big aggregate in it, anything like 3/8 aggregate, say, 3/8 and a half or bigger. you kind of have to skip a couple steps. You can't just set it all up in the rough shape and then go and carve in all your detail, because you'll be carving in to aggregate, which then falls out and leaves like little pockets, and it just doesn't work. So what you'll do in that case is generally, you start smoothing it out in a troweled finish, using more stamps. All your cuts and everything that you make are all troweled cuts. Instead of like really carving. The only carving you're really doing is the initial rough shape, where you're cutting in, pulling material, stacking it, going fast. Like, it's like we're dancing,
Yeah.
We're just constantly moving around.
No, I've seen you spray paint lines, and I've seen where you guys shot up 200 feet on the side of a highway in BC and then spray paint all over it. Is that for your guys? Is that for you?
It's more for the nozzleman.
For the nozzle?
Yeah, so...
And you're using shotcrete, right?
Yeah.
High velocity, dry or wet, but you're not hand packing this stuff.
No, not in those situations. Like, we'll get to that in a second, but when you're carving, you can only carve the material that's there for you on the wall. So generally, whoever's putting the material on the wall is running the guideline for what the outcome is. So whenever I'm shooting, a project, I'm basically drawing the material on with the nozzle. So I'm putting material here. I know that if I got this corner I want to build out, that's my final point. I don't look anywhere else other than that corner.
Yeah.
I'm putting that material, and I'll build out a corner and start bringing it out, and, stacking ledges out, and, generally trying to carve in an isometric view, opposed to, your vertical face plane to a cut 90 edge. I generally shift everything. So when you're looking at it, you see down those lines, and when you look at it this way, you see down those lines, and I try to bring in 3 different aspects to give it dimension.
So you're thinking about shadows then?
Thinking about shadows is a really big part of it too. When the sun hits different areas, you're going to get more shadows, especially in those areas where, it's not meant for climbing. You will generally do more overhangs because you'll get more shadow.
Every pebble in your pool has a story. Come find that story with Ask the Masters on February 27th and 28th, Mesa, Arizona.
That's really cool. I think a lot of people, when they think of artificial rock or fake rock, they think of putt-putt courses. I don't know if you guys have those in Canada or not, but fairly bobo rock work. It's not high end, but you're working on high end, ultra realistic, not just highway production jobs, but multi-million-dollar pool projects, right? So how do you approach a project like that? I mean, what's does it start in the design? Do you go back and think, all right, I've got a complete vision for this project, and now I got to work with the pool builder, where do you go with that?
Generally, if I get brought into a project, there's already been some initial design idea, whether it's, a designer, is it like a pool designer, a landscape architect, an architect. In my area, there's quite a few companies doing what we do, and there is the whole thing that we're fighting against architects saying, no, we absolutely hate artificial rock, like no way, this is artificial, like we can't have this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just recently did a project up in Whistler where that was the battle. It's a $14 million house. And the only reason I was able to get in to do the work was that there's a shoring aspect to the project where the
Soil
boulders,
stabilization.
the boulders were in the backyard. These are big, like 15-ton boulders that are, that could basically fall out and land in the hot tub. So they said, okay, we got to figure out what we can do here. And they, brought me on to consult the project. I showed them some local examples and sent them over to actually go and check, touch, and feel the work. And it was kind of cool because they sent the architect there, and
The one who doesn't like
it was the one who doesn't like the fake rock, and we blended it into another piece of real rock, and he couldn't find our fake rock.
That's awesome. Is that the one that has the sewer pipe going through
Yeah,
it?
we buried.
Nice.
Yeah, we buried the sewer main.
That's a cool project. So you took a sewer main, you didn't. A builder needed to run the sewer main right in, just over top of what was otherwise beautiful rockwork, right?
Yeah,
And he needed to hide it. So that's when he called you.
yeah.
It's so hard to see. It's amazing work. So did that guy turn heel and say, okay, yeah? I
Yeah,
want
so
you to
what
work for
happened
us?
was they said, okay, they basically said, yeah, go for it. Plan the project around that. We did it. It turned out great. It still hasn't been planted yet. Generally, what I'll do on those high-end projects is, I'll get the colors to a place where, it comes to the soft scape, where, they might have some shrubs or some creeping thyme or something that's going to overhang, and 10 years down the road we'll have that natural mineral runoff that'll create those marks and streaks and stuff. And once they have the rough guideline of what they're going to be planting where exactly, I'll come back and do some paint touch-ups and color those in a little bit darker so they'll already be present, so it looks like it's been there already for.
That's one of the neatest things in the coloring process I think I've learned from you is, and I say that, it's really funny, I grew up around rock, climbing rock, being around rock, working with stone, and at a micro level, we're looking at all these nuances, especially as rock climbers, we're looking at nuances in stonemasonry. We're looking at the micro. And I've been guilty of never stepping back and looking at the big picture, the whole forest, the whole giant rock, and seeing these crazy stains that run down rock. And you introduced that to me. And I kind of retrospectively say, duh.
Yeah.
I mean, how did I miss that, And it's so normal to see it. And you're putting it there with color, with paint or stains, and bleeding and washing and creating all these intricacies of the rock for a reason. There's a plant or a hidden piece of iron or something,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating process.
Yeah, it's really all like what most people see is on the outside of rock or a cliff face or something, but what they don't think about is what's in and beyond that. What is inside that rock that is creating this look, or why is this part, this like gray blue, and then there's nothing else like that, but then around the corner, on the same plane is that color again. Why does that happen? Why does, and again, why does moss grow on one side of the rock and doesn't on the other? You start realizing that there's reasons for all these things.
Right.
And why can a tree grow out of a crack in the rock? Where's the root going? Things like that. Like there's, those types of things.
The intricacies of the rock. One of the things you taught us was that the color doesn't necessarily need to chase the feature, right? That's really hard to get your head around. it's
Yeah, generally, in if it's a fractured rock, that color change of the different types of rock, you're only seeing that now because it's been fractured off,
yeah. I
right?
mean, it
So
makes perfect sense.
it doesn't generally always happen just in a crack.
Right.
You don't need a color change. And the other thing too that, I honestly, I still to this day am always trying new things and seeing do I like that, or I might like it, the client might not.
Yeah.
There's just always this, especially being an artist, you really need to start thinking about like, oh, why is this? What are some ways that I can, create this differently? And obviously, we're doing this, people pay us money to do it. So yeah, would I love to just do a paint job, like keep painting this project? Yeah, I could do it for 10 days, but one, am I gonna make any money after that time?
Yeah.
Maybe if they keep paying me to do
They
it,
keep
but
paying,
generally
yeah.
they want you to get the hell out
Get
of
it
there,
out, yeah.
on with the next,
Yeah.
So there's this big speed aspect of things too.
That's
How
why-
can we do this quicker?
Yeah.
I'm working on a new tool right now, actually, that I think is going to really change my game.
I've seen some hints of that. I know we can't talk about it, but
Yeah.
I know you want to.
Yeah,
I want to talk about it.
we got to work on it a little more.
It's pretty killer, man. It's pretty killer. The audience is going to have to wait for that.
Yeah.
So, when we hired you to help us refine our skill set, we had, as you remember, a group of rock climbing artists that had skills with masonry and stone sculptors and all in. I almost felt like we knew nothing at that point. Like you came and said, okay, Matt, you're doing this wrong, and you're doing this wrong. And why don't you try this? And one of those things is in the painting process, the painting or staining. We had a small palette, and you said, no, man, we got like 80 colors out here. And it's not really 80 colors, but we've got our base colors, our primaries, and then there are all these other steps, washes and speckles. And everybody knows probably the speckles, but the washes are really interesting. Is this trade secret stuff? Or
Yeah, the way I look at it is, there's a lot of guys that are scared to tell people how to do it. There's a lot of guys that want to share how to do stuff. And you know what? I'm all for sharing and telling people ways to make their work better, because it only makes artificial rock a better name.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if everyone just keeps hiding all their tricks and not showing what can be done, it's only hurting the trade in general, because you want people to be wanting this, and you want them, they want to hire the best guy, they want the best work, they want the best outcome, but it's nice when people share, like when I work with other guys, I'm not hiding anything from them. I'm not like, oh, is he looking now? Okay.
Yeah.
Do that. It's like, this is how I do it, man.
Yeah.
It all comes down to it's an art. You've been practicing it for a long time. When I first learned, I was, I just learned basically in my garage, right? I learned from a guy who showed me what was out there, what could be done, and gave me that opportunity, and we worked on some of his projects. He's in his 70s now, and he did Hong Kong Park back in the 80s. So it's not a new thing.
Right.
There's new tricks and techniques, and I think what's happened is people just don't share the knowledge as much. And now, there's guys that are starting to do classes and things like that, and showing people, and it's for the good of the industry.
You're consulting, teaching people.
Yeah,
tricks.
I'm doing consulting work, like with your project, showing you guys, and to me, it's not like, I don't see anyone really as a competition. I see them as, we're cohabiting and we're making this a better industry.
Yeah.
Right? We're bringing it back because it was very popular, and now everyone's just kind of hidden their techniques because they want to be the ones that are doing all the work.
That gets called, yeah.
Right? So now they're hiding all these things, and now you're starting to see more guys, and it just drives everybody to be better.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
So the standards now.
That's how we
higher,
get.
and that's the goal.
We get genres of style, right? Pointillism or abstract
Exactly.
painting. It happens because the artists share. They're
Yeah.
all hanging out in the same coffee shop.
Exactly.
Same
You know, it's like
communities.
yeah.
And now we can live 2 countries away from each other and still be peers.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
share knowledge and tricks.
So I think that's the biggest thing that, you know, that's where I'm trying to go with it is, you know, if someone asks me, how do you do this? Is it a trade secret?
Right.
You know, like to me, I don't think there's any secrets. I mean, the way that things have been done is, you know, either the same or different. It's like you can do things differently and still get an outcome that's the same as somebody else's work, or better, or worse. Or, you know, I always say is like, you know, some people know they know something, some people know they don't know something, and some people don't know that they don't know what's there, right? You know, you don't know. Things exist.
Well, it is an art form. I mean, there's no 2 ways about it. Even if you have artistic development skills, it's hard. It takes practice, right?
Yeah.
And you carve all the time. This is the daily gig for you. So you're able to take the skills and just leverage them, and then still communicate your tricks that you find along the way with other peers.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like I've
raised the bar.
I learn new tricks daily. Like I'll be doing a project and I'll say, oh, how's this texture work? Or, you know, I've done things where I've been wearing a belt and I've literally rubbed up against the wall and went back to it and looked at it. I was like, how did I do that?
Yeah.
And then I get home and I got concrete stuck in my belt, you know, and then it clicks. I'm like, oh, well, there you go. Like, and I just leave it. The texture is beautiful.
Yeah, it's great.
You know what I mean? So, like, there's just different ways to do it.
I know I put too
It's
much
cool.
mud on. I remember putting too much material on one day and had a fallout. And
Yeah.
you looked at it and you're like, man, it's a happy little accident, you know?
Yeah.
It's the Bob Ross right there.
You know,
Just run
and
with
you
it.
run some different paint textures in there on that, and it looks different. It's a fallout. It's a real fallout. Now, there's a big difference between also using wet material and dry material. So using
Yeah.
a dry mix, shotcrete,
Dry
and
shotcrete
wet
process,
mix.
right?
So, you know, there's really, it's really different.
So it changes your techniques, right?
It really
You have to-
changes your techniques in the initial stages. Generally, you know, I started, like, I've got an old Sova, Reed Sova,
Yeah.
and that was used on the Hong Kong Bank for all the fireproofing, or
Wow.
all the
Okay,
erosion
yeah.
control fireproofing. That was given to me by Frank, who was my mentor. And
Old dry
you know,
mix.
we
Rotary-
used that.
rotary
That was the original. That's what we did. We ran dry mix and carved the dry mix. And you know, you can't. I don't know. People, you would know this from working with dry mix, but stamping dry mix, it just doesn't work
Yeah.
unless you really get a good plastic stain on the surface, and then you know.
Or if you're using a hydro mix nozzle, and maybe you can get
Exactly,
a wetter plastic
right?
stain on the surface.
Exactly. You know, generally
Definitely less
it's
stampable.
hard to stamp.
Yeah.
But that being said, you can go right to carving and right to getting tool texture when you use
Yeah.
a dry process.
Yeah.
And the hydro mix nozzle really works well, hydrating material so you don't get, you know, any effervescence.
When you saw with our project, we were tweaking the powder and the mix design. So we
Yeah.
used slag cement. Did you like that?
I like the slag cement. Yeah, it really slows things down. You can shoot bigger areas.
We were able to really move. We must have carved for 3 or 4 hours. And
Yeah,
if you didn't like something, you could have pointed to it and we could fix it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
so new technology and material changes the game too, right?
Yeah.
So bag materials or from the ready mix.
Add mix too,
Add
yeah.
mixes.
Add mixes, fibers. Like you introduced me to the jute fibers.
Yeah, and the
You know,
hemp fiber.
the jute fiber, and well, I'm from Canada. We got hemp.
You got plenty of hemp.
But the jute fiber is really cool. It's a cool fiber to work with because you don't really notice it's in there. It's so fine, and it absorbs water. It reduces shrinkage quite a bit because it's hydrating longer, right?
Yeah. We had, I think, 9,000 square feet of rockwork on that project, and basically no shrinkage.
No shrinkage.
That fiber's amazing. I mean, we had a lot of steel in there too.
Yeah.
So, do you guys use a lot of rebar? A lot of steel?
I do personally.
Yeah.
I think, it's concrete, it's gonna crack, and for us doing rock work, you get a couple cracks in there. It's not the end of the world. Typically, they when it cracks in a crack that you've already made.
Mm-hmm.
But
kind of like scoring concrete to create a
exactly.
control joint. It sort of
generally, a crack. What a crack ends up doing is leading to the possible chance of getting efflorescence, right?
Yeah.
So the efflorescence will make your job look less inviting.
Right.
So the less shrinkage cracks, the less cracks in general, the better.
The less efflorescence, the better.
The more it's sealed, the more it's sealed up.
Would you like to get your hands dirty with Ask the Masters? Save the date, February 27th and 28th, 2020.
That being said too, if you're using paints or there's, some new things like what you guys used, it's like a kaleidical silicate, right?
Yeah, the silicate-based stains,
Yeah.
That was from Canada, ironically.
Which is from Canada, exactly, which is a pretty cool product that I'd like to get into using more.
That stuff works
if we
great.
could potentially do some sort of program with them, I'd be interested in using their products some more because I do like the way that it takes on the washes.
Yeah.
It doesn't seal up as much on the surface, but more integrally into the concrete.
Right.
And it works like a paint, which is different than when you would use a stain. It's basically like you're painting, but you're using a tint.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, just 6 months later, it's already growing lichen.
Yeah.
Which you can't do quite as quickly.
Typically with
using
paints,
right?
yeah, the paints will create that surface. But
I know that's site specific, but it's still it's a thing.
Absolutely.
It's cool. We want lichen.
Absolutely, yeah. We want as much natural,
more realism,
dirt, and things that get in there and make it look cool.
Yeah. So, well, we don't use rebar in the South. We use rebar. As you discovered when you were down there.
When I was down there, that was funny because I always bring this up. So I went down to Ryan's project as a consultant. I developed a program online called the Remote Consultation Program, and what it is basically a program that I do from Canada.
Yeah.
We do a Skype-based program or FaceTime kind of thing where you can be on the job site and say, Dan, like this is where we're at, what are we at? And then with that program, I'll go visit the site to make sure, it's done the way that I would want to put my name on it, essentially, right? Yeah. I want to make sure you guys are getting the best possible outcome.
Yeah.
So when we went down there, there was an inspection on a footing.
What kind of inspection was that?
First, the one thing that was interesting about it was the inspector had a shotgun in his car.
Oh yeah, there was that.
There was a shotgun in the vehicle, and I'm like,
North Carolina,
North Carolina, all right, well, don't fuck around with these guys. They're inspectors, they're gonna. So he gets out of the car and says to his coworker, he says, so looks like we got a rebarb inspection here. I was like,
On this footer.
just
Rebarb inspection on a footer.
yeah, rebarb inspection on this one. And I looked at Ryan and he didn't really say much. I was like, okay, well, that's fine. And he says, so how many pieces of rebarb did they use? And I said, is he saying rebarb? And he's like, I think he just said rebarb.
Yeah.
So from there on, it's a bit of a
Welcome to the South.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, that's pretty funny. But yeah, we use quite a bit.
Where we call rebarb and riffraff.
Yeah.
Lots of fun colloquialisms there.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. But yeah, no, we generally use. I use a lot of steel in my work. I think it's important. I mean,
And you got to be careful when you do use steel, right? You got to get good
Yeah.
coverage so you don't
Yeah.
bleed out and rust.
exactly.
So
yeah.
because of that, you put on a structural coat first, right?
Generally, yeah. So what I'll do is, whether the armature is foam, which I like using quite a bit. I'll use foam, and then I'll do a rebar cage over top of the foam,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll do like a 2x2 wire mesh over top of all of that.
Right.
And then
For additional shrinkage mitigation.
and I'll also what I also do is when I'm doing my structure coat, and I'll typically use a ready mix truck
Mm-hmm.
for my structure coat. Do all the structure coat at once.
Because you're usually using wet mix there.
Generally, yes. So I'll add fiber to that mix also.
Okay.
So my structure coat is steel, wire, and fiber. And I've not had any problems with that setup.
So when you're doing the carve coat, you're not diving deep with a trowel.
can't- yeah,
and accidentally
exactly.
exposing some of that reinforcement,
Exactly.
which is going to rust and
Yeah.
cause problems later on.
Yeah.
So you're covering it all up.
Exactly. Otherwise, I don't see any. There's a lot of the new like fiber technologies and stuff. Some guys just go directly to foam, and I don't do that just because I feel like steel and that steel is really there to hold that matrix together.
Well, it helps hold the material in too.
It holds the material on the
As a
wall
shotcreter, I
as a
understand that.
shotcreter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The more steel you got on there, the bigger relief you can get with
The
overhang.
more fun you can have.
Exactly.
To be sure.
So, it's just one of those things. You don't want it to sound hollow either, right? So you got to get some material on there.
Yeah.
Get rid of that hollow sound. Generally, you're going for the most realistic finish. That's the goal. So.
Right. So yeah, some guys use the foam, spray just a thin material, and then you can come knock on it. Everybody that
yeah.
sees that project knocks on it, right? But
It's
when it's
yeah, and
deep
you know
flat,
what?
you
Like
know
what
it's
the first pieces that I ever made was foam, and I used like a fiber reinforced concrete
Mhm.
on it, and it was thin, like it was like half an inch thick.
wow.
And you could knock on it; it sounds super hollow. And, it was like that was some of the first pieces.
Yeah.
And then I say to everyone that I'm teaching, I'm like, it's never gonna happen right the first time. So
Yeah.
you don't have to waste a ton of money if you're just learning to carve. Go get some foam, get some, shape the foam, put some material on it. Don't get too crazy because you're gonna end up coming back and probably throwing more on it after it's dry. And then once that's done, throw more on it when it's dry. You can literally start with a little boulder this big, start practicing, and
explore.
turn it into a massive boulder just from practice, right?
I remember our very first project. It had to be, 16, 18 years ago. Excuse me. And we did just that. We had this huge styrofoam panel. And it was for a home show. And we cantilevered it over a passageway in a pond, or a water boat. And we suspended it back with these steel cables and big steel frame, this armature that we used to hold it in place so that you could walk underneath it. And all the shaping was done in the styrofoam. We used torches and acetone, and you melted the foam and carved the foam, and which probably wasn't very good for us, but we built this whole thing in our shop, and then sprayed it thin, and it was just that. But it looked real, it looked legit. But you knock on it, and it clearly wasn't real.
Yeah.
And so you evolve over time, right?
Exactly.
As we all do in any given industry, we evolve and learn.
Yeah, there's
So where do you see it going? What's next? I mean, what's the future of rock carving? And I hate calling it artificial rock. It's rock carving.
That's the thing is there's no real good name for it. It's
not actually fake at this point.
If you can make it
true.
look
It's not natural rock.
I typically will say it's hyper realistic rock, but still even to that it's kind of like, well, what is that though? Where does that go? I mean, I think where it's gonna go is, there's gonna be some new designs that can be implemented now, knowing like with what's possible with shotcrete and what's possible with the finishes. Like I'm in the process right now of developing a project that, I want to build the house that's on top of the bond beam of the pool. So the wall comes right out of the bond beam and have, that whole wall is going to be rock.
This is in Whistler, right?
This is just something in my mind.
Oh, okay, okay.
This is
thinking
there's
of what
no
you were
place,
telling me about. Right.
But there's you can now build a whole exterior of a building with shotcrete and carve it and make it look like rock. You know what I mean? Like you can now change the landscape and live inside these things, and bridges and water tanks that you can now add these kind of finishes to.
Give an aesthetic appeal to a utilitarian object.
Exactly, things like that. There's many different ways to do it. You could do it on a budget. There's, that's what I always say too. It's like if people are, oh, we want this and that, I say, okay, well, you can have it 3 different ways, basically. I can do it for this price, do it for this price, and do it for this price.
Like you said, you could paint for days.
Exactly.
You could carve for days, right?
You could carve smaller sections and do things like that, or you could do it all in one day. What do you want? Do you want this? And I typically push people towards spending more money to make it look realistic, because that's the reason why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I've been where people say, oh, we don't want that. We don't want this. We want pool rock.
Right.
We want the round pool rock. And
the dinosaur turds.
I'm sorry. It just I don't typically do that. And generally where I go with my stuff is it's hiding construction mess. Essentially. They had to build a footing on top of this to build this house, or this house is we live in the mountains, so we're constantly using natural rock and blending it in to make things look smaller. Rather than having a big concrete wall the size of this wall, we can tie it into Rockwork to make it look like it's actually smaller than what it is.
And you have to be fast to do that.
Yeah.
Right? You got to move. I know I poignantly remember one of the first things you said to us was, guys, you're going to be here forever at that pace, right?
Yeah.
We got a bunch of rock climbers and stonemasons carving, thinking about Gastons and little ledges and things we can hold on to, and you're like,
it's
come on, guys.
Sometimes you can just overdo it too. Like sometimes what you think, and I say you're carving for the paint. It's not only are you just carving for the color of the paint, but you're carving for the texture with the paint. Right. So those washes, when you do your wash, it sucks into those little pores, and that's where you see that color difference, right?
Yeah,
it's so not just on the surface. If it's on the surface, it mutes what's really there. So that color is that texture. The texture is what brings out the different layers of color.
It's fascinating. So where do we run next, man? Get a drink?
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to reach you, I mean, I found you on Instagram via a buddy, actually, at a skate park there. And how do they find you?
You know, social media nowadays is pretty important. You know, day to day, you know, I'm updating my Instagram to my projects.
What's your handle?
Ocean Rock Art.
Ocean Rock Art.
Yep.
There you go. That's how you
Easy,
find
simple. You
kids.
can Google Ocean Rock Art. Generally comes up right away.
Yeah.
That's typically where I send people, and from there they'll find my website, which is oceanrockindustries.com. I don't generally show my tricks.
Right.
If someone messages me on Instagram, I tell them everything.
Yeah.
I'll tell them everything, but just to the general public, if someone shows interest and direct messages me, that's where they'll get information.
Yeah, through engagement.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You know.
Otherwise, it gets bastardized
Yeah.
and misunderstood. So,
Yeah, exactly.
And those tricks don't even, you wouldn't look at that necessarily and understand it. I mean, I've certainly watched, picked up so much from it.
Yeah. Or,
Man, it's a lot to take in.
If other builders, you know, are thinking about, you know, for a project or whatever, like they could do like what you did with that online remote consultation program.
Yeah.
Which works well, you know. Pop down and basically like for a visit, check in and make sure it's going well, and you know, you kind of get like almost a workshop class out of that too,
right.
where you are hands on.
Yeah. Well, it's valuable. So I think that's a wrap.
Cool, man.
Yeah. Go get a drink.
Thanks for listening to the Ask the Masters podcast, and don't forget to check out our Facebook page each week on Tuesdays for new episodes of the show. I also want to encourage you to stop by the Ask the Masters Facebook page and invite other like-minded individuals to join us there as well. Feel free to jump into the conversations and even post your own questions. We want to create a community which fosters learning and discovery for the betterment of us all. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Please be sure to subscribe and feel free to share.